So, kind of moving into, the winemaking portion, you
Wait, this
use,
whole conversation is not going to be about music? That's what I was
I mean, I would love to. I'm like, do you play any instruments? That's the question that I want to know. Do
I
you?
used to. I used to play.
Oh,
I grew up
okay.
playing instruments, playing in bands, producing music. That's what I was doing up until that 9/11 like life-changing moment.
Right.
And I moved out here, and shortly after, I hung that up and started DJing, and that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years. Is
Gotcha.
playing music for people rather than making music.
Sure.
Slightly less satisfying, but I don't know, has its own. DJing's like, I guess, being like a sommelier. There is pleasure in presenting things and
Sure.
introducing to people that they've never experienced, and
Yeah.
that posture of pointing at something that's beautiful that people had overlooked or were never aware of. Wherever in life you can do that, I think I get the most pleasure from pointing. Like, hey, have you noticed how amazing that song is, or have you noticed how amazing this wine is? That act of pointing out beauty to others is one of my favorite things.
Sure. I love that. Well, I love music too. It's a beautiful thing. It's a cosmic force, as you say.
Yeah.
As is wine. We love it. So, you use Loire Valley as your inspiration for winemaking, right? What Loire Valley producers inspire you most? And which Loire Valley wines do you most enjoy drinking?
There's kind of a small core of producers that really shaped and informed my drinking early on, when I was in retail, and then deciding to use that as a template for winemaking. It was just an extension of drinking those wines when I was in retail, and that was largely driven by the fact that that's what I could afford, on the wage of an assistant wine steward at a grocery store. You can believe I wasn't drinking Burgundy or Champagne or Barolo, but I could drink the best Muscadet. So Marc Olivier, Pepier, Breton, drinking Le Coup. Like, they're towering figures in that region, and I could afford to drink them every day. Of course, in Touraine, Clos Blanche is kind of my biggest influence. I mean, the winery largely follows that model that they made at Clos Blanche. Again, you could afford to drink the best wines of Touraine every day. I mean, when I started, those wines were like $15 retail. That's just preposterous sounding now that you could buy those wines for that price. And even up until the end, before they stopped producing, they didn't get much more expensive, $18 maybe. And then in Chinon for the Cab Franc, I'm a big fan of Jérôme Lenoir. As elusive and as mysterious as he may be, his wines are the most magical expression of Cabernet Franc that I've ever had. And then in Sancerre for the Sauvignon Blancs, at the risk of sounding, because I always hate when winemakers say, "Oh, this is my Lafite," or "This is my, this is my Bartaux." Like, no, it's stop. It's not, okay. But Sauvignon Blanc is such an underdog and is so maligned, especially amongst the cool set, that I feel like I have to point out that what Vuitton and Cotat and occasionally Raffo and even Dagenham did at one time, they made profound expressions of Sauvignon Blanc and proved that Sauvignon Blanc can be a transmitter of terroir. And we don't think of Sauvignon Blanc that way. We think of it as just varietal wine. It tastes like Sauvignon Blanc. But they disproved that completely and can make really profound wines, meditative wines. And if I was going to fuck around with Sauvignon Blanc, if I was going to bother doing it, it had to be to try to do it like that, rather than this ubiquitous international stainless steel variety. So there's a few. I covered a lot of the regions, right?
Yeah, we hit the Nantes region.
Pinot and Vouvray. Let me throw Pinot in there now that I'm making sure.
We hit all the major regions.
See, a lot of Louis Dresner looms. Joe Dresner looms large over my
Oh,
worldview of wine.
yeah. I think one of my favorite sayings about Sauvignon Blanc is even on its worst day, it's going to be kind of mediocre, unlike Chardonnay, which at its worst is just not.
The lows are low, right, right. It's true, it's true.
Kind of the magic of Sauvy B.
Right. So I think that that's not a list of like of the moment, zeitgeist producers. But 10 years ago, when I think for a lot of people who were getting to wine 10, 15 years ago, especially in the industry, those wines were a revelation. Mm-hmm. They were profound when you discovered them for yourself. And I don't have a lot of experiences like that more recently with producers in the Loire. I think that they set a really, really high bar for making wine in this way. And I don't know if anyone's really met that for me.
I definitely agree.
Utilizing the natural wine posture to make a classic expression of something. You can use natural wine approaches and techniques to make something that deviates entirely from a classic expression or traditional expression. That's easy to do. To employ that approach to make something that is readily identifiable as being from that place or that style of wine, I think that's really difficult to do. Okay, off pedestal.
Yeah, that's the dream. Yeah. So outside of Loire Valley, like any other regions have a special place in your heart? I mean, not even like in winemaking, but just drinking.
Okay, full disclosure. I mostly drink Riesling.
Oh.
I probably 60% of the bottles I open at home are German Riesling. I'm obsessed.
As an acid junkie, I understand.
That's pinnacle for me. Like I'm intimidated. I've been offered access to Riesling fruit on a few occasions, and have just passed because I'm intimidated. Like Riesling just seems like one of the hardest wine to make to me. That maybe in Champagne, but I think that's why I love it, because I couldn't possibly recreate it, can't possibly do it. And great German Riesling can only it can only come from there. It can only be that one singular thing. Yeah, it's mostly Riesling.
It's that transmitter of
Loire
terroir.
wine. Sorry, I know that is narrative busting, but I don't in fact mostly drink Loire wine.
No worries. Sometimes, we put something on a pedestal and then we stay in our comfort zone.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, speaking of, being offered fruits, as an urban winemaker, as a negociant style, if you will, you are sourcing your fruit. What do you look for when you're selecting like vineyard sites or farmers that you're working with?
Yeah, this scrappy negociant lifestyle is, it's different than being a vigneron or farming your own land for sure. I often compare it to being a chef or a restaurant that works with great produce. No one thinks that the chef has to be out there farming acres of produce in order to make good food or conscientious food or philosophically correct food. So I view it a lot in that lens, is that I'm trying to find growers that I can work with that grow in a way that suits my style and my philosophy. So first and foremost, I'm looking for correct farming or a sense that I can tilt them in that direction. Not everybody's willing to make that change. In fact, most growers are not willing to go from conventional to somewhere on the organic spectrum. But I look for people that have the fruit and the conditions I'm looking for to make this style of wine. This is Willamette Valley, cool climate wine. Initially I was emulating the Loire a lot. But the reason I was doing that is because it looked far more similar to me. More humble to me than this Burgundy comparison. We have a lot of homogeneous, deep, wet clay and sedimentary soils. That's not Burgundy terroir. So I'm looking for cool sites, which is increasingly harder with climate change. I'm generally looking for obviously Loire varieties, which are not for obviously Loire varieties, which are not common here. So that, that's self-selecting for very few people in the Valley. Yeah, and then I'm looking for someone who farms or is willing to grow into a relationship where they farm organically. For Pinot, it's those old heritage clones at high elevation or cool sites. That seems to be the magic formula for Pinot in the Valley for me. The rest we're all just learning, like Pinot's the only thing I work with that we have this track record of decades to understand. Everything else is kind of new. But for Pinot, that seems to be, I'm giving away the formula. Cool climate, heritage clones, preferably ungrafted.
Mm.
That's the magic winning formula for Willamette Valley Pinot. For me.
Good to know.
Get after it.
I'm off to try. No. Yeah. So speaking, how is the culture of wine shifting on the West Coast right now? Like, what are you seeing? Like the ebb and flow of Oregon,
Yeah, I don't feel as qualified to speak to California or Washington.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a distribution wholesale business here. And so I am engaged in that because I represent a number of California producers.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really excited and inspired by what's happening there. I think they're making some real leaps in quality in the real or the new California style or the natural California style. I think it's come a long way in the last few years. In many regards, I think they've surpassed what we're doing here in the Willamette Valley in that category. But as far as Willamette Valley goes, what we're experiencing right now is this democratization of wine. Mm-hmm. And opening up of, I guess, the confines of what the narrative had been for 30 or 40 years. So that means two things. There's so many varieties being planted or grafted right now that are not Pinot Chard or Pinot Gris or Pinot Blanc. It's astonishing how many people are seeing the viability or the desirability in doing that. We're way too young to have the story be written that this is the only thing that this region can do, especially because if a region is really, really optimal for growing grapes, then theoretically you should be able to grow a lot of things there, not just two varieties. So on the one hand, we're seeing this explosion in accessibility to non-Burgundian varieties here, which is exciting. Mm-hmm. And then we're seeing a democratization in wine in that these collective facilities that allow winemakers to start producing wine with, a couple barrels or 10 barrels or whatever it is, has lowered the obstacles to entry or the bar to entry into this industry. And so you're seeing people that you would not have normally seen make wine or become brands before, where you needed all this money to buy land and to buy infrastructure, and there's a huge hurdle to it. So and democracy is messy, so there's a lot of stuff that's not particularly exciting or interesting, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But the trade-off is you get to see some remarkable wine and made by some remarkable people that maybe never would have been able to do that 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, love that.
So I think that's the story. There's probably other stories, but those are like the large kind of overreaching narratives that I see here over the last 10 years.
Wonderful. Yeah, I mean, to make wine, more approachable and, more fun, less intimidating overall, right? So do you feel like your wines fit that category?
I sure hope so.
Yeah, I feel like they do. I
hope so. I mean, I think that everything about the wines attempts to communicate that from the aesthetic of the wine, what's in the bottle. Mm-hmm. And obviously the labels try to do that. it's really hard to convey to people that have gotten into wine in the last 5, 6, 7 years that as recently as 10 years ago, labels like this were completely like revolutionary or radical. You know, I'm not claiming to have started that, but to deviate from the picture of a chateau or a painting of a tree or alluding to some piece of property or geographical feature or big house, that was the dominant vibe of the visual component of wine just 10 years ago. And so it was absolutely by design to make labels that attempted to demystify that and make it more approachable. And now that's
Beautiful.
like the whole millennial zeitgeist is, that's it. Like you can't make a of the moment wine with a traditional label on it. You'll have an uphill battle trying to sell your wine. So maybe we've swung, the pendulum's maybe swung too far. I definitely experience beautiful wine, correctly priced, made by wonderful human beings that doesn't sell because the label looks old-fashioned and stuffy.
Sure.
That seems like a bit of an injustice, but it's kind of the moment we're in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's time to move on to sort of what becomes sometimes a difficult question. So we start talking about natural wine.
Yeah.
And so it's always like a huge conversation when someone walks in the shop and it's like, where's your natural wine? And then it's like, okay, hold on, let's stop. What are you looking for? Are you looking for organic, sustainable practices? Are you looking for a certain flavor? So it's always turns in like this little mini conversation with each of our customers. The term natural wine, what does that mean to you, and how are you pursuing that?
I mean, obviously it's shorthand. You know, people get really hung up on the word. You know, how could anything be unnatural? So it's clearly shorthand for something that seems to evade description, at least to a lot of people's satisfaction. And I understand that we like definitions. We like to be able to paint these binary pictures or these monolithic pictures so that we can understand things, check the box and move on. But I think it really eludes that. And I get why that's frustrating for a lot of people. I think natural wine is one of those things that's it's meant for the people that give a shit about it. And if you don't give a shit about it, I don't really think we're required to make that more understandable or approachable. Like, if you don't like punk rock, it's not incumbent upon the punk rock community, the musicians and the fans, to expend a lot of energy helping you understand punk rock. If you like it, great. You'll figure out who's doing it in a way that you like, and who you want to support and who you'll be a fan of. I'm not sure it needs to be any more than that. The people that give a shit about natural wine know what that is for them, for the most part. And it's always kind of bemused me that it's that controversial. You know, if you made that argument about, you know, food or even beer, I don't think anyone would get hung up on it. You know, you know, the German purity law, no one gets angry about them bragging that it can only have hops, malt, water, you know, yeast. Like, no one gets cranky about that. That's a standard of purity that no one says that you're denigrating all other beers that don't follow that formula. But the thing that I'm circumlocuting here is, you asked me what that is for me. I think it's really simple. Just like what you would want in any food item that you probably want to purchase or consume. I want it to be farmed well. I would prefer for it to be on that spectrum of organic, biodynamic, regenerative, you know, somewhere on the spectrum of trying to be respectful and conscientious of the part of the earth that you're responsible for. That's where it all starts. And then after that, I think I'm just, in terms of natural wine, I'm just interested in wines that express what that place or that vintage or that winemaker is trying to express with as little chicanery or hijinks as possible. I don't think that conventional wines are evil. I drink, certainly, you know, a number of conventional wines. But for me, the winemaking question I'm most interested in answering is how expressive, how delicious, how transmittive of me and this place can I make a wine only using those grapes and what's available to me from nature and not from machinery or added chemicals, except sulfur. I don't mind. A bit of the devil dust is okay with me.
Stability is great.
I don't, you know, and, you know, we can, you know, if we're going to get heated, we'll drift into it now. Caring more about whether something has 10 parts per million or 30 parts per million sulfur versus whether or not Roundup is put in the vineyard, conflating those two things in their relative importance, to me, is baffling. I don't understand people that spend more time quibbling over 10 ppm sulfur, but never ask what's in the vineyard. I don't really think you're taking this very seriously if that's what you're getting hung up on.
Yeah, I like that.
So there's a controversial bit. I try to like navigate, weave my way through that without controversy, but in this present moment, that the kind of wine bro tendency to latch on to the most obvious simpleton like signifier of natural wine and not invest in the really difficult work, which is knowing, you know, about the farming. And it's less and less patience for that.
Macro, not
Macro,
micro.
big. Yes, thank you. Yes. We got to, like, if you're going to move the needle on any of these problems we're confronted with, you got to think big picture rather than one bit of minutia. You know,